Here on the Colour of Country Life, we're catching up with Anne Webster, the member for Mallee. It's in Canberra for a second sitting week. Anne, just what's the feeling there at the moment, particularly about this Indigenous voice to Parliament?
Look, the Nationals, I am really pleased to say, have a united voice. We are backing Jacinta Price, who has first-hand experience. For those who don't know, she is Indigenous and lives in Northern Territory and sees the heartache of what goes on in outer Indigenous communities, in Alice Springs, the harm that comes to children and women and, So the position that we have taken is that we don't support the voice. We understand that it's going to be, at the end of the day, a referendum and Australians will decide, but we believe that the Labor Party have not been transparent about how the voice to Parliament would be, would occur, who's going to be elected. From Jacinta's point of view, the people who've been involved in the voice so far are elitists. You know, we're talking about academics and people who are not living on the ground with the violence and the horrors of some of the communities and the disadvantage of transgenerational poverty. And so we don't believe that another bureaucratic layer to Parliament is going to be effective in any way, shape or form to resolve those issues.
Well, Anne Webster, I've noticed the comments, I think, attributed either to David Littleproud or a National Senator for Northern Territory, Jacinta Price, talking about a concern that it would be a voice for Redfern in Sydney and not so much, say, for a Deniliquin or Carnarvon in Western Australia. Is there a concern that it would simply be yet another replication of the problem we've already got in politics, where it's metropolitan voices, not regional ones?
Absolutely. And we've got to remember that one of the principal foundations of being an Australian is that we have a democratically elected government and that every citizen is seen as equal under the law. That should always be the case. Anything that divides us as a nation by race or by age or by disability or by any other form, we ought not to buy into. There is no clarity around how this voice would actually operate. And to have even the notion of Indigenous voices being able to slow down legislation, not allow the democratic processes of government to operate, can well have unintended consequences, shall we say. At the moment, we have a tremendous amount of investment goes into supporting Indigenous businesses, in supporting Indigenous programs. They need to be refined. We fundamentally believe that the cashless debit card was a really strong policy, and now, as Jacinta will tell you, we have alcohol and also the lifting of the bans on alcohol, because for freedom of choice, means that kids are now not going to school again. Children are running the streets to not be at home lest abuse occurs, which is, everywhere. So I think adding that, the layer that I have received in terms of talking with Indigenous people in Mallee, and I will continue to do that, I want to hear what people feel and think and so forth, is that they believe that their Indigenous communities, these are Indigenous leaders I'm speaking to, they believe that their Indigenous communities are more concerned about day-to-day issues, about things like the cost of living, things about getting their kids to school, health issues, than they are about another bureaucratic layer to government. It is just not within their bailiwick. They're not interested in it. And those who are aware of the voice, because many are not even aware of it, don't know what it is, they are concerned that it will be a voice exactly as David Littleproud suggested, a voice for Redfern. Not a voice for those who live in regional and rural areas. And I might say one of the other leaders that I've spoken to is he's really concerned it won't represent him that Labor haven't been transparent, that there will be a further disconnect between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians. And that gets back to that racial divide that we don't want. They don't want it. We don't want it.
Well, something that we could take our lead from in terms of transparency from Labor is what we're seeing in South Australia, where the state parliament or the state government is trying to roll out a voice there. 6 zones they would divide the state into, and these zones would be enabled to demand they could have a speech in Parliament about any topic they like. So it does seem, when Labor talks about one vote, one value, one of their core values, an Indigenous person would have 2 votes. They'd get to vote for the person who can have their Indigenous voice to Parliament, but also they get to vote in the general election as well.
Well, I find that quite astonishing. It undermines our democratically decided governmental processes from the time of Federation. To have other voices in the House as opposed to those who are democratically elected by all citizens, it just strikes me as being really unwise, and the outcomes we will wait to see what occurs.
Well, Anne Webster, speaking of democratic voices, the Victorian state election occurred on the weekend. I imagine you're happy with how Jade Benham has polled in the seat of Mildura.
Yes, she has done very, very well. She's an excellent candidate. She will be an excellent member for the people of Mildura. And I am very excited that I'll be able to work with her. Shame we didn't do better in the overall context. I don't understand that, frankly, but there you go.
Well, the National Party did, at least it seemed, pull a few seats back from independents that it had lost not that long ago.
Yes, absolutely. So it looks like we've gained 3, which is wonderful.
Yeah, and when it comes to some local issues, you've stirred the pot, and I've noticed Dan Tehan said similar things down in the southwest about this Roads of Strategic Importance program. Bit of outrage on social media on this one.
It is outrageous. $248 million taken from Mallee roads. They're all Mallee roads. They're Mallee highways. The Henty, the Murray, the Sunraysia, the Calder and the Western Highway, all in Mallee, and they have taken $248 million out of it. No by your leave. We had committed that funding to our desperately needed roadworks and widenings and, safety measures. Given the contribution that Mallee producers make to GDP, which is $10 billion a year, that the Labor government would take that funding from our roads is beyond belief. At the same time, and in the context that the Victorian Labor government will not continue the repairs to the rail to be able to, for trains to carry 21 axle road limits, 2100, and to travel at 80 kilometres an hour. It just makes it unviable for producers to get their product to port or product to domestic markets. So we have massive road trains, surprise, surprise. Our highways are in disrepair and they are not safe. And then we mix it with grey nomads in the caravans and young families just trying to get to school or to the doctor or wherever they're going. And, you've got a recipe for disaster. And they've pulled the funding. I am outraged by it.
One of the impacts that's happened with the roads have been lots of rain and moisture in the soil, but also flooding. The flooding coming down the River Murray, it's good to see. Is it even from today, Tuesday, that local residents will be able to access additional flood support funding?
Yes, absolutely. So I've been in touch throughout this last month with the Minister for Emergency Services, Murray Watt, and I'm pleased to say he has been responsive and his office have been responsive to photos that I've sent through. Please, can you escalate this designation of emergency for this area, because we've got 11 out of our 12 shires have experienced flooding and are on the DRA, disaster recovery allowance, and then the Commonwealth. There is so much funding that is available. I've put it on the website and webster.com.au. If anybody doesn't know what they're doing, they don't want to flip from the Service Australia, which is the Commonwealth site, or the Victorian Services app. They can go to my website. We've got all the links there, all the phone numbers there. I am being called by farmers who are really going through the most horrendous time. Entire vineyards are destroyed around the Mildura region, and it's devastating.
Yes, it's absolutely terrible, and it just goes to show that sometimes if you've got state and federal and different elements, there probably is a case for some sort of coordination of these efforts into the future, where you've got maybe a one-stop shop for people like you're providing at the moment as a local MP. Is there a case for a sort of one-stop shop for help when it comes to natural disasters?
Look, I think that largely the state government, because they manage a lot of the money, the Victorian state government emergency site should have much of the funding information on it, but I know that Services Australia is where you need to go to fill in an application form. As I say, I think I've put them all together because I know how frustrating it is when you're in a desperate situation and you just need to find what you need to find. Having it all in one spot is really handy. So I guess it would still have to be state by state because you can't compile New South Wales and Commonwealth on the same site as you'd compile the Victorian, although for some whiz-bang digital expert they probably could. But I think, I'm certainly happy to provide that service at this point. And also people can call my office. We're happy to walk them through whatever they need to do.
Now, and just before you go, I did notice in Parliament you spoke about your husband, a GP, and the hours he's working, and that's symptomatic of a whole range of medical problems. I noticed Rowan Ramsey said across the Eyre Peninsula where he lives, one doctor now to 7,500 people after 2 doctors resigned. What is it going to take to get this resolved, this rural doctor shortage?
Look, we are in crisis. There is no question about that. And I am I've met with the AMA this week. I'm about to meet with them again today. I've met with the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. I've met with the Rural Health Workforce Network. I'm going to meet with the Rural Health Commissioner in this next week or so. I think it's next week. I'm meeting with her. David Littleproud has charged me with developing a regional health policy to take to the next election. I've also so I'm in process of doing all of that, listening to locals, listening to the reality that we have 40 to 50% of our current GP workforce, 40% Australia-wide, but 50% in Victoria are aged 55 years and older. That's not a good story for the next 10 years. So the crisis is about to deepen, and only 13.8% of medical graduates are considering general practice, and only 3% actually go out to the regions. So there are so many problems to deal with, and the attack, if you like, is to target multiple things at the same time. For example, the education, I did a speech last night on this, the education bill that Labor have just put through is actually our legislation that we brought to the House at the end of last year. They've now tabled it without any changes, which is great. We're seeking amendments on it so that it actually expands beyond medical, but at this point in time it is the HECS and Health Relief funding for doctors and nurse practitioners if they practice in a regional area. So basically we will fund their HECS debt, which is up to $100,000. So it's not just, it's not nothing. It's
a massive contribution.
Yeah, so it is an incentive to get doctors to go out to the regions. The error that I took to Mark Butler, the Minister for Health currently, the Labor Minister for Health, has been his expansion of the distribution priority area for international graduates who come across to Australia and largely work in our regional electorates. By expanding the distribution priority area, he has taken doctors out of the regions and given them the opportunity to practice in Frankston, Parramatta, Elizabeth, and you name it. That is a huge problem. Every organisation related to medical workforce is extremely concerned about that. So I've met with Rural Workforce Australia recently in the last couple of weeks, and I've said to them, you need to make sure that the Minister understands how devastating this is to our regional workforce. So, look, there are a lot of irons in the fire, if you like. We're not in government, so in this next 2 years, I will be working very hard. Even as the Shadow Assistant Minister for Regional Development, I'm very focused on health delivery, because if a young family who are teachers perhaps are thinking about moving out to a regional area and there is no health service and they have a young family, they will not be moving. So health delivery is fundamental to every regional area, and it must be adequate for the number of people who live in that region.
Well, Anne Webster, plenty of, like you say, irons in the fire, some comprehensive work to be done. Glad you're on the job. Thanks for joining us again on Flow.
Thanks very much, Ricky.